Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 377. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. A lot of news to get to on today's show, but just want to remind people that you can help out the show by donating to antiwar.com. I'm the opinion editor for the site, so I work on the viewpoint section every day, pick out the spotlight article, and, helping antiwar.com helps, promote this show, the message of this show, and fight against the American empire. We have matching funds this week. We'll be wrapping up our fundraiser soon, so if you can help us just get over the finish line, just need a few more dollars, so head to antiwar.com and make a donation. If you can't do that, just share the show, like the show, subscribe to the show somewhere, help us in the algorithm and get out there to more listeners if possible. And with that, I'll jump right into the news. First story today from Dave DeCamp at Jason Ditz at antiwar.com. Media fault Pompeo for defending Saudi assassination of journalists. Released this week as a part of an effort to kickstart his presidential campaign, former Secretary of State and Director of the CIA, Mike Pompeo, released his memoir, Never Give an Inch, Fighting for the America I Love, and it caused considerable controversy in addressing and ultimately dismissing the Saudi Arabia assassination and dismemberment of Washington Post reporter Jamal Khashoggi. The Trump administration did little in response to the killing, and Pompeo's State Department led efforts to argue that Mohammed bin Salman, the de facto Saudi ruler, MBS, likely orchestrated the matter, but still ought not be held accountable for the crime. Pompeo's argument in the new book both vilifies Khashoggi and downplays his value as a reporter. Pompeo claims Khashoggi is an activist with ties to the Muslim Brotherhood and that he mourned Osama bin Laden. Khashoggi's wife dismisses these claims, as do media outlets he was connected with. And so it really shouldn't matter, if Khashoggi's an activist or a reporter. I know that people like Mike Pompeo like to blur that line. That way, if somebody is reporting news that they don't like, they're able to smear them, quote unquote, smear them as an activist, and then that somehow gives him a license to kill. I think he took a very similar stance and approach with the WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. And remember, Pompeo discussed killing him as well. So, this hatred that Mike Pompeo has for journalists is very concerning. And we're just seeing it here again. And it's especially concerning here because this is in his well thought out memoirs. It's not like he was in an interview. It was maybe, kind of through a back and forth, gave these answers. This is something that's clearly thought out. It's run probably through various vetting people, and Mike Pompeo, ended up keeping this in the book. Now, the other important thing here, I guess, is that what Mike Pompeo is describing here is essentially the path and the policy that the Joe Biden administration has also followed. On the campaign trail, we had the candidate Joe Biden saying, we're going to hold MBS and the Saudi state accountable as global pariahs and treat them this way because they murdered a Washington Post journalist. And then when Biden became president, he did exactly what Mike Pompeo and Donald Trump did, and that is dismiss these. Even though the U.S. assesses that MBS was responsible for the assassination, the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, they're still not going to do anything to hold Saudi Arabia accountable. So again, it's not really surprising that this is Mike Pompeo's opinion. It is kind of surprising how starkly he puts it in his book. And this is just his vendetta against journalists who publish and say things that he doesn't like. And again, very similar to his treatment, Julian Assange. Next up is an article I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on January 25th. Haiti seeking country to lead armed UN mission. Haiti's President Ariel Henry has called on the United Nations to deploy an international peacekeeping force as violence escalates in the Caribbean nation. While Washington supported Henry's rise to power, the U.S. appears unwilling to lead the UN security mission. Both the U.S. and Canada expressed no interest in an armed mission in Haiti during a UN Security Council meeting on Tuesday, the Associated Press reported. The U.S.'s Deputy UN Ambassador Robert Wood argued that Haiti must address its continued insecurity challenges and said the International Committee should support these efforts but did not directly respond to the latest request for a troop deployment. And so I think this has been Washington's position all along. They really do want a armed UN force in Haiti. They just don't want it to be an American force. And it appears that, their main target to get that to happen, Canada is resisting, as well as Mexico. So I'm not sure, who's going to end up leading this force. Back to the article. Henry first requested the UN-backed force last October when he urged foreign partners to help quash rampant gang violence and civil unrest that erupted following the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse in July 2021. The new leader has served as both the caretaker president and prime minister ever since, despite suspicions that Henry was involved in Moïse's murder. The UN Special Envoy to Haiti, Helena Lalime, warned that gang violence in the country had reached level not seen in decades, telling other Security Council members that Haitians overwhelmingly want this assistance so they could go about their daily lives. But we have seen a lot of protest in Haiti, directly opposed to any American intervention or, foreign intervention in that country. According to UN statistics, more than 780 people were killed and another 540 kidnapped between January and May of 2022. In October, senior State Department officials visited Canada in an effort to push Ottawa to lead the military coalition. However, Canada also appears to have resisted the American pressure, with both countries instead deciding to supply armored vehicles for Haiti's National Police Force. Washington and Ottawa have also proposed international sanctions for gang leaders, with Wood suggesting that additional penalties were in the works during Tuesday's Security Council meeting. All right, now let's get into news about the war in Ukraine. U.S. arms sales soared in 2022 due to Ukraine war. This from Dave DeCamp, January 25th, antiwar.com. U.S. arms sales to foreign governments boomed in 2022 as defense firms cashed in on the war in Ukraine. According to State Department numbers, sales rose to $205.6 billion in the fiscal year 2022. The sales are divided into two categories: direct military sales between a U.S. company and a foreign government, and sales that are overseen by the U.S. government, known as foreign military sales. The State Department said the U.S. government approved 51.9 billion in potential arms sales in 2022, up from 34.8 billion in the previous year. Direct sales between governments and contractors rose to 153.7 billion in 2022, up from 103 billion in 2021. One of the prime drivers of the increase in arms sales was the U.S. European allies increasing military spending in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and looking for new equipment. The U.S. has been encouraging countries in Eastern Europe to get rid of older Russian-made equipment by sending it to Ukraine and replacing it with new U.S.-made arms. And this is something that I have been talking about since the beginning of the war, really screaming about on this show. How the people advocating for this war, the people implementing this war, the policy, the people making the policy decisions on this war are all cashing in on these arms sales. One major deal from last year was Germany's decision to purchase Lockheed Martin-made F-35 fighter jets worth about $8.4 billion. The F-35s are meant to replace Germany's fleet of Tornado aircraft that are capable of dropping U.S. nuclear warheads stored in Germany. The U.S. is also encouraging countries in the Asia Pacific to beef up their militaries as a part of a buildup aimed at China. One major sale in that region was for Indonesia buying 36 Boeing-made F-15 fighter jets worth $13.9 billion. Next up, German foreign minister says we are fighting a war against Russia. And I was on the Scott Horton show this week for his LA KPFK drive time radio show. I think I was on the first segment in that show. Dave Swanson was on the second, and I discussed this article there. But if anybody listens to the Scott Horton show, please check that out and share that interview. I think I did a pretty good job this week. Anyways, German foreign minister says we are fighting a war against Russia. This from Dave DeCamp again. Germany's foreign minister said Tuesday that Germany and its allies are fighting a war against Russia in a rare, candid remarks about the Western role in the conflict. And I think this has essentially been true for some time, but it's really just an admission. And there's this tweet from Michael Tracy where he says, German foreign minister declares war on Russia. And that's not the most nuanced way of describing it, Michael Tracy. However, it is more or less correct. And Twitter put a note on this saying, that Germany really isn't declaring war. But, that is essentially what's going on here. Certainly, if Russia was providing this extent of weaponry to any country in a conflict with the U.S., we would certainly see it as being in a direct war against Russia. Next up, this from Will Porter at the Libertarian Institute on January 27th. Russia warns of full-blown conflict in Europe. The decision by the United States and several allies to supply Ukraine with main battle tanks is paving a direct path for a full-scale war in Europe, Russia's deputy envoy to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, has warned. In a statement issued on Thursday concerning the dangerous policy the Western Alliance countries to escalate tensions in Ukraine, Deputy OSCE Representative Maxim Bukanovich said foreign arms deliveries to Kiev would only prolong the current conflict or kick off a larger regional war. The leaders of the United States and their NATO client states have come close to a red line. Their deliberate actions to escalate the military confrontation in Ukraine, provoking the regime into military action against the Russian population using Western heavy weapons and NATO intelligence, is a direct path to full-blown military conflict in Europe, he said, arguing that all people on the continent definitely stand to lose from such a war. The Anglo-Saxon puppeteers of this escalation will not sit on the sidelines this time. The statement followed an agreement between Washington, Berlin, and other European partners to send heavy armor to Ukrainian forces earlier this week, with the U.S. preparing to ship more than 30 M1 Abrams tanks, in addition to about a dozen Leopard 2s from Germany and Challenger tanks from the UK. While it will take some time before the tanks reach the battlefield, the decision marked a sharp reversal for the U.S., which had repeatedly declined to send M1 Abrams tanks in the past. The White House has made a similar about-face on Patriot missile defense batteries, one of which was authorized for Kiev late last year despite previous refusals. Germany, the UK, and Poland have said their tanks will arrive in Ukraine in a matter of weeks, but the timeline for the American weapons remains hazy given the large backlog of orders for General Dynamics, which produces the Abrams. Poland currently expects to receive about 250 M1A2 tanks, while Taiwan previously ordered about 108 units of the same model. Deliveries are expected till 2024 and 2025. However, the single facility capable of manufacturing the Abrams can only produce about 12 units per month. It's unclear how long it will take before Ukraine gets the 31 tanks pledged this week. And, just to get into this a little bit more, we've talked about this in the past on the show, but the U.S. is actually ordering and purchasing these tanks for Ukraine. They are not sending them through the Presidential Drawdown Authority, which would send them directly from American stockpiles to Kiev's army. So it does seem that this backlog is relevant here, even though a lot of people say, hey, look, the U.S. has more Abrams tanks than it will ever use or need. Russia's OSCE rep went on to say that the military aid from Western states only deepens their involvement in the armed confrontation with Russian troops, claiming their support is not pro-Ukrainian but rather anti-Russian. Their masks have long been thrown off. They are no longer embarrassed to say directly that this is all about the struggle for some kind of Ukrainian statehood, but is about the promotion of a rules-based world order being formed by the West, the official said, citing a recent comments from the Russian foreign minister who declared we are fighting a war against Russia earlier this week. So, Will's building off of Dave DeCam's story a little bit there. Will's article wraps up. Moscow has vowed to destroy all NATO weaponry sent to Kiev and said it would respond to Western tank deliveries, with Russian ambassador to Germany saying the move takes the conflict to a new level of confrontation. It remains unclear how Russian forces will react to the decision, though a large round of airstrikes was reported around Ukraine on Thursday, including in the capital city. This morning, I was doing a little bit of reading on those airstrikes, and it does appear that they were significant. And Ukraine, I believe, even said that they felt like this was making it more difficult for them to repair their energy infrastructure as time goes on. Next up, Kremlin says U.S. Abrams tanks will burn in Ukraine. Responding to President Joe Biden's pledge to send 31 Abrams tanks to Ukraine, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said the U.S. tanks will burn. I am certain that many experts understand the absurdity of this idea. The plan is disastrous in terms of technology, but above all, it overestimates the potential it will add to the Ukrainian army. These tanks will burn just like the others. Biden made the announcement just days after Pentagon officials said the U.S. didn't want to send the tanks due to difficulty of maintaining the tanks. The New York Times reported on Wednesday night that the decision to send tanks was more of a political calculation to get Germany to send their own Leopard 2 tanks, which are lighter and more practical for Ukraine's armed forces. The Times said the decision was a triumph for political calculation over logistical concerns. It said the decision made no sense to the Pentagon to go through the logistical headaches of sending the country's most advanced tanks to Ukraine when there are very capable German Leopard tanks nearby that could get to Ukraine faster and operate more effectively. And this is, just the absurdity of the whole situation, where so many of these decisions are made based on political calculations within everybody's individual home country and really doesn't have a lot to do about the Ukrainian people or the Ukrainian battlefield. What an important article here from Dave DeCamp. Ukraine expects to get all the Western weapons it wants. Shortly after President Biden announced Ukraine would be getting the Western-made tanks it sought, Ukrainian President Zelensky was demanding fighter jets and longer-range missiles. Ukrainian officials have been lobbying for months to receive F-15 or F-16 fighter jets from the U.S. and Army tactical missile systems, munitions with a range of 190 miles that are fired from the HIMARS systems. The U.S. has held off on providing such arms due to concerns they could be used to target Russian territory, but the U.S. has previously ruled out, other equipment to Ukraine that it eventually sent, including the M1 Abrams tanks and, as we discussed in Will's article, the Patriot missile batteries. An advisor to Ukraine's defense minister told Reuters that he is confident Ukraine will eventually get everything it wants. They didn't want to give us heavy artillery, then they did. They didn't want to give us HIMARS systems, then they did. They didn't want to give us tanks, now they're sending us tanks. Apart from nuclear weapons, there is nothing left off this list we will not get. Zach, the advisor, said the next big hurdle would be getting fighter jets. If we get them, and the advantage on the battlefield will be immense. It's not just F-16s. Fourth generation aircraft is what we want. Politico reported on Tuesday that conversations between Western military officials on supplying Ukraine with advanced aircraft are already underway. And let's get into this next article here. And I got a little bit of a breakdown here because I feel like I've been talking about this for several weeks now. Lockheed says it's ready with F-16s if the U.S. and its allies choose to send them to Ukraine. Lockheed Martin has says it's ready to meet demands for F-16 fighter jets if the U.S. and its allies choose to ship them to Ukraine. So far, the U.S. and its allies have been hesitant to send fighter jets to Ukraine due to concerns they could be used to attack Russian territory. But Western powers seem less and less concerned about escalations as the US and Germany have now pledged to send their main battle tanks to Ukraine. Frank St. John, chief operating officer at Lockheed Martin, told the Financial Times there has been a lot of conversation about third-party transfers of F-16s, which will involve European nations armed with F-16s shipping them to Ukraine. St. John said Lockheed wasn't involved in the conversations but was preparing for the eventuality. He said the arms maker was going to be ramping up production of F-16s in Greenville, South Carolina to get to the place where we would be able to backfill pretty capability any country that chooses to do third-party transfers to help with the current conflict. The Netherlands expressed openness to sending F-16s to Ukraine last week, with the Dutch foreign minister saying they would look at any request for the aircraft with an open mind. Another option could be the former Warsaw Pact countries are now NATO members send their older Soviet MiG fighter jets to Ukraine and replace them with F-16s or other modern Western-made aircraft. A Ukrainian Air Force spokesperson claimed on Tuesday that the U.S. and Ukraine have already determined an aircraft that Washington will provide for Kiev. The spokesperson didn't specify which one, and there has been no sign from the American side that an agreement is in place. Throughout the war, Ukraine has been lobbying for the U.S. to provide F-15 and F-16 fighter jets, which will involve months of training for Ukrainian forces. The U.S. has already pledged to send weapon systems that require extensive training, including Patriot missile defense systems and M1 Abrams tanks. Lockheed Martin has benefited greatly from the war in Ukraine, as many of its weapon systems are now in high demand, including HIMARS rocket systems, Javelin anti-tank missiles. President Joe Biden showed his appreciation for the arms maker last May when he visited a Lockheed Martin plant, providing javelins, and said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Now, the reason I knew this was coming was because last month, I believe, or maybe early in January, there was a report that the Pentagon was going to pass on the Lockheed made small diameter bombs attached to rocket motors because that technology would be redundant on the battlefield. And the way that technology is redundant is if you don't need the rocket motors to get these small diameter bombs up high enough to use the guided systems to hit your targets, and you just have them on fighter planes. And so that would either mean putting them on F-16s. I kind of think the more likely next step would actually be to get all these NATO member states with MIDs to send those MIDs to Ukraine, let those get destroyed, then start sending the F-15s and 16s to Ukraine. So my guess is it's going to go that way. However, from some of the more recent reporting, it sounds like they might bypass that and actually just start sending the F-16s to Ukraine. Now, this is a pretty twisted story here, very disgusting. White House refuses to say if Ukraine will get toxic depleted uranium ammo, and why they won't give an answer to this is very concerning. The White House refuses to say if it will provide Ukraine with Bradley fighting vehicles equipped with radioactive depleted uranium rounds, ammunition that is linked to cancer and birth defects. Depleted uranium is typically created as a byproduct of enriching uranium and is extremely dense, making it an effective material to pierce the armor of tanks. Bradleys can be equipped with depleted uranium ammunition, which is why they are known as tank killers. When asked on Wednesday if the Bradleys the U.S. is sending to Ukraine will be equipped with depleted uranium, a senior Biden administration official said, "I'm not going to get into the technical specifics." The official also declined to say if the M1 Abrams tanks the U.S. providing to Ukraine will be equipped with a depleted uranium cage. Now, story on Israel here. USS Israel to send Hawk anti-aircraft missiles to Ukraine. The USS asked Tel Aviv to allow its old Hawk anti-aircraft missiles to be sent to Kiev, Axios reported on Wednesday, citing unnamed U.S. and Israeli officials. I'm not sure how big of a deal this is now. There was a time in the war where really Israel really was an impartial party and really was a country that you would have, thought that, maybe it could be the third country to sit down with Russia and Ukraine as a role that Turkey has filled throughout this war. But, that was potentially Israel having long-standing and deep ties with both countries. And if this happens, it would certainly take that off the table from ever occurring. However, comments made by Russian officials, as well as some support that Israel has given Ukraine, probably means, we've already crossed that point at this point anyways. Want to get into this next story. Is from Responsible Statecraft by Ben Armbruster. Media help launder U.S. military PR on joint military drills with Israel. And he goes into these 3 separate reports from CNN, NBC News, and Reuters. Were almost identical in reporting, repeating official talking points and ignoring criticism. And Ben writes, political media critics often accuse journalists of being stenographers for those in power when they seem to be regurgitating what a government official says in an article without offering any critical assessment of those official claims or providing a counterclaim from someone of similar expertise. But sometimes media outlets take this practice to a whole other level and effectively serve as government public relations firms, as illustrated when CNN, NBC News, and Reuters published stories this week on a joint U.S.-Israel military drill in the Middle East. All 3 articles made exactly the same 4 points. First is that this was a massive military drill that came together quickly, and I'm not going to go through and read every quote from all 3 just because I think it'll be kind of confusing to do on air. But if anybody wants to, please check out this article and you can really see how, again, the language is almost exactly the same. Second, all 3 reports said the exercises were meant to demonstrate Washington's commitment to Israel despite its controversial incoming far right-wing government. Third, all 3 outlets stressed the exercises were meant to show Washington's adversaries that the United States is not overcommitted elsewhere or bogged down in Ukraine. And finally, the CNN, NBC, and Reuters reports on the joint U.S.-Israel military drills all this week made sure to point out that this wasn't about Iran, but wink, wink, the Iranians aren't blind. None of these articles contain any sense whatsoever as to whether these exercises might not be a good idea. No one quoted is giving an opposing view, which essentially means that these stories are press releases for the U.S. military disguised as legitimate news reports. It wouldn't have been too much to lift for these reporters to include at least one voice of criticism, a point that I made to test. It took me about 30 seconds to write an email to Paul Pillar, a U.S. Middle East expert and non-residential fellow at the Quincy Institute. He responded to me shortly thereafter. While Netanyahu's government no doubt is delighted to draw U.S. military into its business, Pillar said, nothing about this exercise explains how it advances or protects U.S. interests. Pillar added, to the contrary, a tight military leadership with Israel, which has initiated more hostilities and has fought more wars against more countries than any other state in the Middle East, only increases the risk of the United States being dragged into another war in the region. So one last story today, and this is from Brett Wilkins, and we reprinted this at antiwar.com. It's originally from Common Dreams. Human Rights Watch says Israel designed entry rules to further cut off Palestinians from the outside world. And I'll read Brett's article here because he says it better than I will. A top Human Rights Watch official warned on Monday that restrictions recently placed by Israel's apartheid government on foreigners, including Palestinians, seeking entry into the West Bank could turn the illegally occupied territory into another Gaza, which is also often described as the world's largest open-air prison. Last year, a 3-page document used by Israeli authorities to screen foreign nationals wishing to enter the West Bank was replaced by a 61-page guide detailing occupation forces policies and procedures for foreigners seeking to visit only the West Bank, excluding East Jerusalem, or an extended stay for specific purposes, including studying, teaching, volunteering, or working there. The guidelines are a distinct form from those for those entering Israel, which are normally applied to the Ben Gurion Airport and other ports of entry, explained Human Rights Watch, whose own Israel-Palestine director Omar Shakir was denied an entry permit under those new rules. A West Bank permit holder without an Israeli entry visa has no legal authorization to enter Israel, nor occupied East Jerusalem. Human Rights Watch director Eric Goldstein said in a statement that by making it harder for people to spend time in the West Bank, Israel is taking another step towards turning the West Bank into another Gaza, where 2 million Palestinians have lived virtually sealed off from the outside world for over 15 years. This policy is designed to weaken the social, cultural, and intellectual ties that Palestinians have tried to maintain with the outside world. And of course, with so many Palestinians, being forced into refugee situations abroad, this is particularly concerning. Now, the other thing is this really represents a shift in policy by the Israeli government. They're cracking down on the Palestinians actively. 9 people died in the Jenin refugee camp in raids. I believe that was on Thursday night in Israel. And then we had airstrikes in Gaza. So I'm guessing this is going to be something that I'm talking about quite a bit next week, what's happening in Israel. Usually airstrikes by Israel will invite retaliation by Hamas. And then it's basically, maybe a week or two of bombing at the very least. And a lot of people end up dead. So bad news all around. Anyways, thank you all so much for tuning in. Thank you all for being patient as I try to get the schedule for this show a little bit more regular. I should be moving into my new house early next week. And then hopefully internet is set up, fairly quickly, and I'll get rolling, have another 3 shows out next week. As always, I'm writing at the Libertarian Institute and read antiwar.com every day. Thanks, everyone.